You don't fire someone who's won 12 awards in a decade unless they're too dangerous to keep. And when I saw the word gratitude in my termination letter, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because they thought I'd still clean up their messes like I always had. They forgot who designed the system. They forgot I still held the keys. My name is Natalie Ward, and at 38, I'd spent the last decade making sure Blue Cascade systems never went dark. Not once, not even during the hurricane that took out half of Houston's power grid. While everyone else was posting about their flooded cars on Instagram, I was knee-deep in server water, rerouting traffic through our Phoenix backup. That morning started like every other, 5:45 a.m. sharp. I rolled out of bed, bypassed the coffee maker I'd drink it cold from yesterday if I had to, and logged into our monitoring dashboard from my kitchen table. The familiar green lights blinked back at me across 7 distribution centers. Pennsylvania, check. Arizona, check. Texas, still recovering from last week's power surge but operational. Then I saw it, a ghost in the machine. Someone had accessed the root directory at 4:17 a.m. The logs showed the query. Clean as day. But no user ID, no authentication trail, just a surgical extraction of our vendor API keys. In my world, that's like finding a broken window with no footprints in the snow outside. I knew who it was before I even pulled the security footage. Derek Finn, our newly minted Deputy Director of Operations, whose only qualification was marrying the CEO's niece at a vineyard wedding I'd been mysteriously uninvited to. The same Derek who'd asked me 3 times in the last month to simplify our security protocols because they were slowing down innovation. I'd written everything down, of course. 9 months ago, I'd compiled a 73-page risk assessment that read like a prophecy of exactly this moment. Database vulnerabilities, access control weaknesses, the catastrophic potential of our legacy authentication system. I'd even highlighted, in bold Arial font, that I knew our CEO preferred, that our vendor connections operated on a trust-based handshake that could cripple our entire supply chain if compromised. The response, a 2-line email. Thank you for your thoroughness. We'll review this in our next quarterly planning session. That was March. It was now December, and that quarterly session had been postponed 4 times. I should have seen the setup coming. The past 3 months had been a masterclass in corporate erosion. First, they'd removed me from the executive meetings to free up your time for more technical work. Then they'd hired a consulting firm to audit our processes, which meant 23-year-olds in borrowed suits asking me to explain why we needed redundant failovers. Last week, Derek had started copying himself on all my vendor communications, just to stay in the loop. But I'd built this system from scratch. Every line of code, every fail-safe, every automated process bore my fingerprints. What they didn't understand, what they'd never bothered to ask, was that I'd also built in a dead man's switch, not out of paranoia, but out of prudence, the Pulse Protocol. I'd called it a simple, elegant solution every 24 hours. The system required biometric confirmation from its primary architect, me, miss a check-in, and the system would begin a gradual shutdown sequence. Not a crash, I wasn't vindictive, just a slow, systematic withdrawal of services that would look, to any observer, like a series of unfortunate but unrelated failures. It was 6:28 a.m. when my phone buzzed. A meeting invite for 6:30 a.m. The subject line, Quick Sync. In 10 years, I'd never been invited to a quick sync. I saved my work, backed up my personal files to my encrypted drive, and took one last look at the dashboard. All green lights, pulsing like a healthy heartbeat. They had no idea what they were about to stop. The conference room on the 40th floor had glass walls that pretended to offer transparency while actually revealing nothing. At 6:30 a.m., the morning sun hadn't yet burned through the Seattle fog. Leaving the city below us wrapped in gray gauze, 3 figures sat at the far end of the polished table, their backs to the view, water bottles arranged in front of them like a barrier. Derek Finn occupied the center seat, his wedding ring catching the overhead lights as he shuffled papers he wasn't reading. To his left sat Miranda Holbrook, the human resources transformation specialist they'd brought in 6 weeks ago. She wore the kind of severe blazer that screamed efficiency, while her eyes screamed discomfort. On Derek's right, Thomas Liu from Legal avoided eye contact by studying his phone with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. Natalie, please, Have a seat, Derek said, gesturing to the lone chair across from them. The power dynamics weren't subtle. 3 against 1, them elevated by the morning light, me squinting into it. I sat. Didn't touch the water bottle they'd placed for me. In hostage situations, you never accept refreshments. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Miranda began, reading from a script she'd probably memorized on the elevator ride up. We want to start by expressing our sincere gratitude for your invaluable contributions to Blue Cascade Systems over the past decade. There it was, the gratitude. When corporations thank you before 7 a.m., you're already gone. Your dedication, particularly during critical infrastructure challenges, has been nothing short of exceptional, she continued, her voice hitting every HR-approved note. However, as part of our ongoing organizational transformation and strategic realignment, I let her words wash over me like white noise. Strategic realignment, organizational transformation, the corporate poetry of betrayal. My eyes drifted to Derek, who was pretending to review what I could see was my personnel file. 12 commendations, 3 declined promotions because I'd refused to play politics, 1 73-page memo that might as well have been written in Sanskrit for all they'd understood it. Effective immediately, Miranda was saying, we've prepared a generous severance package that reflects your years of service. She slid a folder across the table. I didn't open it. What about the transition? I asked, my voice steady as the servers I'd nursed through 1,000 midnights. The Pulse protocol alone requires. We have full confidence in our team's ability to maintain operations. Derek interrupted, finally meeting my eyes. His pupils were dilated. Fear or excitement? I couldn't tell. The documentation you've provided over the years will be more than sufficient. Documentation? I almost smiled. They thought infrastructure was about documentation, like you could capture the soul of a system in PDFs and flowcharts. Like you could document the intuition that told you a server was about to fail by the way its fan pitched half an octave higher. Like you could write down the vendor relationships I'd cultivated with 3 a.m. phone calls and personal guarantees. I'll need you to sign these. Thomas finally spoke, producing a stack of papers that landed between us with a soft thud. Standard separation agreement, non-disclosure, non-compete. I picked up the pen they'd thoughtfully provided. Black ink, good weight, the kind of pen you sign surrenders with. No questions about ongoing projects, I asked, looking at each of them in turn. No concerns about the Patterson Industries integration next week, the firmware updates scheduled for Thursday, the security patches that need manual verification, because our automated systems are still running on. We've got it covered, Derek said, too quickly. Your access will be revoked as soon as you leave the building. Security will escort you to collect any personal items. I signed where they wanted me to sign. Clean strokes. No hesitation. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand from their glass tower, was that I wasn't the one trapped in this room. One question, I said, setting down the pen. Did anyone ever read the risk assessment I submitted in March? The silence stretched like a held breath. Miranda glanced at Derek. Derek glanced at Thomas. Thomas glanced at his phone. We appreciate all your input over the years, Miranda finally managed. I stood, smoothed my jeans I'd never bothered with corporate dress codes, and headed for the door. Behind me, I heard Derek exhale. The sound of a man who thought he'd won something. Natalie, Miranda called as I reached the door. I turned. Your keycard and any company devices. I unclipped my badge, pulled my company phone from my pocket, and set them on the table. The keycard landed face up, my photo staring back at them. In it, I was smiling. That was taken my first day, when I still believed in things like loyalty and recognition. The USB drives, Thomas prompted. Any backup devices. I almost laughed. They were worried about USBs. I spread my hands, showing them empty palms. What they should have been asking about was what I wasn't leaving behind, the biometric authentication that kept their world spinning. But you can't confiscate knowledge. You can't revoke experience. And you definitely can't change the protocols of a system when you don't even know they exist. Thank you, Derek said, already turning back to his papers. Security will meet you at your desk. I left them in their glass box. 3 executives congratulating themselves on a clean termination. They had no idea what they'd just signed. Security gave me 15 minutes to pack. The guard, Marcus, had the decency to look uncomfortable as he watched me fill a cardboard box with 10 years of accumulated life, a cactus that had survived longer than most employees, a coffee mug with a faded Linux penguin, the foam stress ball shaped like a server that I'd squeezed through countless system crashes. "I'm sorry about this, Nat," Marcus whispered when his supervisor stepped away. "This place won't be the same." I patted his shoulder. He had no idea how right he was. My personal keychain jangled as I dropped it into the box, a collection of metal trinkets and memory sticks that told the story of a decade. Mixed among them, innocuous as a house key, hung a 128GB USB drive, encrypted, of course, not with company data. I wasn't that petty, just with memories, code snippets, personal projects, and a complete copy of every contract, every system diagram, every piece of critical infrastructure I'd ever designed. My intellectual property, predating Blue Cascade's claims by years. They could take my badge. They couldn't take my brain. The 73-page memo lived on that drive, along with something more valuable, the complete documentation for the Pulse protocol, not the sanitized version I'd submitted for approval, full of reassuring corporate speak about system resilience and automated fail-safes. The real version, the one that explained how a biometric heartbeat governed the entire ecosystem, miss a beat, and the body starts to die. I'd written it after the hurricane incident, 36 hours without sleep, watching our backup generators fail one by one while the C-suite sat comfortable in their Denver homes. Sending emails about maintaining stakeholder confidence. That's when I realized they'd let this whole system burn before admitting they didn't understand it. So I built in my own insurance. Not malicious code, I wasn't a saboteur. Just a dead man's switch that ensured the system needed its architect. Every morning at 6 a.m., I performed what I called the pulse check, a biometric scan from my home terminal that confirmed I was alive, well, and still employed. The system would accept the verification and continue operating normally for another 24 hours. Miss the check, and it would begin a cascade of authentication failures. First the edge servers, then the vendor APIs, finally, the core infrastructure itself. Each failure would look random, unconnected. Hardware degradation, software timeouts, certificate expirations, death by 1,000 digital cuts. Derek didn't know, Miranda didn't know, the entire board of directors didn't know, because they'd never asked how the system really worked, they just knew it did. The USB drive had weight to it as I pocketed my keychain. Not physical weight, 128 grams of aluminum and silicon, philosophical weight. The weight of knowing you're carrying the keys to a kingdom that's about to lock itself. "Time's up," the supervisor announced, tapping his watch. I sealed the box and followed them to the elevator. As we descended, I thought about the backup documentation they were so confident about. Hundreds of pages describing what the system did, but not why it did it. Like having a medical textbook without understanding circulation. They could see all the organs, but they didn't know about the heartbeat. The Pulse protocol was documented in only 2 places: my encrypted drive and my mind. The official system documentation mentioned it only in passing, buried in subsection 47C of the Infrastructure Maintenance Guidelines. Automated health monitoring via proprietary pulse check system, see Appendix J. Appendix J didn't exist. I'd been meaning to write it for 3 years. Funny how you never get around to documenting your own job security. Outside, Seattle's December rain had started, turning the morning commute into a river of brake lights and frustration. Marcus walked me to my car, holding an umbrella over both of us. "They're making a mistake," he said as I loaded the box into my trunk. "Yes," I agreed. "They are..." He wanted to say more. I could tell. Maybe ask if I had another job lined up. Maybe promise to stay in touch. Instead, he just nodded and headed back to his post. We both knew how corporate gravity worked. I was already becoming a ghost, someone to be mentioned in whispers and past tense. I sat in my car for a moment, watching the rain streak down the windshield. My phone, my personal one, showed the time, 7:43 a.m., in 22 hours and 17 minutes. The Pulse protocol would expect its morning check. For the first time in 10 years, it wouldn't get one. I started the engine and pulled into traffic. Behind me, Blue Cascade's tower disappeared into the low-hanging clouds. Somewhere up there, Derek was probably updating his LinkedIn, adding system optimization to his list of achievements. Miranda was filing my termination paperwork. Thomas was billing hours. None of them were thinking about tomorrow morning. But I was, because tomorrow morning, the pulse would stop. And when it did, they'd finally understand the difference between owning a system and knowing a system. They'd scramble for the documentation, find my memo, and realize with dawning horror that every warning I'd given them was about to come true. The USB drive pressed against my leg through my pocket. Every contract I'd written, every vendor relationship I'd established, every security protocol I'd designed. All right there, waiting. I wasn't going to destroy Blue Cascade. I didn't need to. I'd simply stop keeping it alive. There's a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is active, messy, traceable. Justice is passive, clean, inevitable. What was coming wasn't revenge. It was just the natural consequence of forgetting who held the keys. The first domino fell at 6:01 a.m. the next morning. I watched it happen from my home office, coffee steaming beside me, my personal monitoring setup displaying what Blue Cascade's team would start seeing in about 15 minutes. The Pulse protocol had waited exactly 60 seconds past its expected check-in time, then began its programmed decay. Stage 1 authentication, degradation. The edge servers in Pennsylvania started rejecting vendor handshakes, not all of them that would be too obvious, just enough to create what would look like network congestion. The morning shift at the Harrisburg Distribution Center would notice orders trickling instead of flowing. They'd restart the routers, check the cables, blame Comcast. Everything they tried would seem to work for about 10 minutes before degrading again. My phone buzzed. A text from Rajesh, one of the senior engineers I'd trained. Hey Nat, weird cue, but did you change anything in the Penn servers before you left? Getting some wonky timeout errors? I didn't respond. I was already gone. Remember, my access revoked. My expertise no longer required. By 6:30 a.m., the Arizona facility joined the symphony of failure. The inventory management system began displaying ghost products items that existed in the database but couldn't be located, verified, or shipped. The warehouse workers would spend hours hunting for pallets that the system insisted were in row J, slot 47, only to find empty space and confusion. I pulled up the 17 different Slack channels I still had access to through a bot I'd created years ago for system monitoring. Officially, the bot was decommissioned. Officially, I didn't have these windows into their panic. Officially, a lot of things. Anyone else seeing these errors in AZ? Same in PA, database corruption. Can't be. Backups are clean. Where's Derek? In a meeting with the board, do not disturb him. By 7:15 a.m., Texas joined the chorus, the pride of their fleet. The massive Houston facility that I'd personally resurrected after the hurricane started rejecting incoming shipments. Every barcode scanned as invalid. Every manifest appeared corrupted. 23 trucks full of holiday inventory sat idling at the loading docks, while minimum wage workers shrugged and supervisors screamed into phones. The beauty of the Pulse protocol was its invisibility. Each failure appeared unrelated, localized, fixable. A network timeout here, a database hiccup there, a credential expiration over there, like organs shutting down in sequence, each presenting its own symptoms while hiding the underlying cause the heart had stopped beating. Urgent. All hands engineering meeting at 8 a.m. appeared in the Slack channel. I smiled. They were about to discover what every paramedic knows: you can't diagnose a cardiac arrest by examining the fingernails. My personal dashboard showed the cascade accelerating. The vendor APIs were next authentication tokens expiring in waves. Each vendor receiving errors that looked like Blue Cascade systems were rejecting them. Patterson Industries, our largest partner, would be getting security warnings right about now. Meridian Logistics would see connection timeouts. Smaller vendors would simply find themselves locked out, their morning uploads failing with cryptic error messages. At 7:42 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the Denver area code. I let it go to voicemail. Natalie, this is Harold Fitzgerald, the CEO himself, calling before 8 a.m. His voice had the careful modulation of someone trying not to sound panicked. We're experiencing some technical difficulties this morning that might benefit from your insights. Despite yesterday's transition, we'd value your consultation on a contractual basis. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. Contractual basis. Yesterday I was a liability. Today I was a consultant. Tomorrow I'd be a case study. The Slack channels had devolved into digital screaming. Pennsylvania is completely down. Who has the runbook for vendor API resets? Check the documentation. I am checking it references Appendix J. Where the hell is Appendix J? Someone call Natalie. Derek said absolutely not. We handle this internally. I pulled up the 73-page memo on my personal screen. Page 47, Section 4, Paragraph 2. The Pulse protocol requires daily biometric authentication from the system architect. Failure to receive authentication will trigger a progressive shutdown sequence designed to protect data integrity during an uncontrolled leadership transition. I'd spelled it out, used small words, included diagrams. But they'd never read past the executive summary. By 8 a.m., as Blue Cascade's entire engineering team crammed into their war room, 3 more distribution centers had joined the failure cascade. Customer service phones rang nonstop. Twitter began lighting up with complaints about delayed shipments. The company's stock price, I noticed with detached interest, had dropped 2% in pre-market trading. Another unknown number called, this time from Seattle. I recognized the extension Derek's office line. Voicemail again. Natalie, it's Derek. I know yesterday was abrupt, but we need your help. The systems are experiencing issues that seem related to your area of expertise. We're prepared to discuss terms that reflect your valuable knowledge. Please, call me back. I noticed he didn't apologize, didn't admit error, just pivoted from termination to negotiation like yesterday was a distant memory. My coffee had gone cold. I warmed it up and returned to my screens. The cascade would continue for another 16 hours before hitting critical mass. By then, every distribution center would be offline. Every vendor relationship would be severed. Every customer order would be frozen in digital limbo. All because they'd forgotten that systems aren't just code and metal. They're relationships, understandings, daily acts of care that keep the pulse strong. All because they'd forgotten that when you fire the person who keeps the heart beating, you better make sure you know how to work the defibrillator. My phone buzzed. A LinkedIn notification. 3 recruiters had already reached out. Having somehow heard about my transition, the tech world was small. Word traveled fast. By lunch, I'd have a dozen offers. But first, I wanted to watch the full cascade. Not out of spite, out of professional curiosity. I'd designed this protocol 3 years ago but had never seen it run to completion. Every engineer wants to see their code execute perfectly. And this was executing exactly as designed. By 9:30 a.m., Derek had called an emergency all-hands meeting. I watched the chaos unfold through my monitoring systems. A symphony of panic played out in error logs and Slack messages. This is a coordinated cyber attack, Derek announced to the assembled engineering team. His voice carried through someone's hot mic, broadcasting his delusions directly to my home office. Someone has infiltrated our systems with malicious intent. I want forensics on every server, every log file, every access point from the last 48 hours. The engineers murmured their confusion. Sarah Kim, one of the few competent security analysts left, raised her hand. Sir, I'm not seeing any signatures of external breach. No unusual traffic patterns. No exploitation attempts. No. Then look harder, Derek snapped. This doesn't just happen. Systems don't simultaneously fail without cause. Oh, but they do. Derek, they do when you remove their life support. Marcus Petrov, the database administrator, spoke up next. The failures are following a pattern consistent with authentication timeout cascades. It's almost like the systems are checking for something that isn't. I don't want theories, Derek interrupted. I want solutions. Where's the disaster recovery playbook? Section 12 of the infrastructure documentation, someone offered. But it references the Pulse protocol for critical system recovery, and we can't find any details on. Then improvise. You're engineers, aren't you? I pulled up my copy of the disaster recovery playbook. Section 12. Subsection 3. In the event of Pulse protocol activation, contact the system architect immediately. No other recovery method is recommended or supported. I'd written it myself. They'd approved it without reading. The forensics team spent the next 2 hours chasing ghosts. They found no malware, no intrusions, no corrupted files. Every system was functioning exactly as designed, just without the daily heartbeat that told them to keep functioning. Like examining a corpse and finding all the organs intact, unable to understand why it won't get up and walk. At 11:47 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number Melinda Kane, CIO of Cascade's biggest competitor, Meridian Logistics. I answered on the second ring. Natalie. Her voice was warm, professional, tinged with opportunity. I heard about your departure from Blue Cascade. Unfortunate timing for them, considering the technical difficulties they seem to be experiencing today. News traveled fast in our industry, faster when stock prices were involved. I'm enjoying my first day of freedom, I replied, watching another distribution center fail on my screen. I imagine you are. Listen, I'll cut to the chase. We've been following your work for years. That hurricane recovery alone was worth a case study. We have an immediate opening for a chief infrastructure architect, full autonomy, equity package, and a team that actually reads documentation. That last bit made me smile. You've done your research. I've done more than that. I pulled your 73-page risk assessment from a mutual contact. Brilliant work, especially the section on authentication dependencies. We'd like to implement something similar here with proper protocols. Of course, proper protocols, proper respect, proper understanding that infrastructure isn't just technology, it's trust. When would you need an answer? Honestly? Yesterday, but I understand you might need time to consider your options. How about we meet tomorrow? Lunch at Canlis. We can discuss how someone with your expertise might help us avoid the kind of technical difficulties that seem to be plaguing others. I agreed to lunch and ended the call. The irony wasn't lost on me, Blue Cascade's competitor offering me a position while Blue Cascade burned through its own digital infrastructure. By tomorrow, when we met, the full scope of the failure would be apparent. Meridian would look like the stable alternative. Stock prices would shift. Market share would follow. The Slack channels had devolved into pure chaos. Pennsylvania is ghost town. Nothing's working. Texas just went completely dark. Has anyone tried calling Natalie? Derek said no external consultants. Derek's an idiot. She built this whole thing. Can we restore from backups? The backups are failing authentication too. How is that even possible? I'll tell you how it's possible. When you build a system that depends on trust, biometric trust, authenticated trust, daily verified trust, and then you break that trust, the system breaks too. It's not malicious. It's just honest. By noon, someone had leaked the situation to TechCrunch. The headline read, Blue Cascade Systems experiencing significant technical disruptions across multiple facilities. The article speculated about cyber attacks, ransomware, disgruntled employees. That last one made me laugh. I wasn't disgruntled. I was just gone. Another call came in. Harold Fitzgerald again, the CEO. This time I answered. Natalie, he began without preamble. We need you. The company needs you. Whatever Derek told you yesterday, whatever papers you signed, we can work around it. Name your price. It's not about price, Harold. Then what an apology? You have it. A promotion done. Your job back with a 50% raise. Consider it approved. I looked at my screen where another vendor connection had just failed, dropping $30 million in pending orders into digital limbo. Did you ever read my risk assessment? Harold. The 73 pages I spent 2 weeks writing. Silence. Then I tasked Derek with reviewing all technical documentation. And did he? More silence. What do you want? Natalie. What did I want? I wanted 10 years of warnings to be heard. I wanted infrastructure to be valued before it failed. I wanted executives to understand that some things can't be fixed with emergency meetings and war rooms. I want you to understand that what's happening isn't an attack. It's an architecture working exactly as documented. Your systems are failing because they no longer recognize their architect. You removed the heartbeat and wondered why the body died. Can you fix it? Could I? Yes. Would I? That was a different question. I'm considering other opportunities, Harold, but I wish you luck with your technical difficulties. I hung up. The cascade would continue for another 12 hours. By then, Blue Cascade would understand the true cost of treating their infrastructure architect as expendable. They'd learn that some knowledge can't be documented, some systems can't be inherited, and some people can't be replaced. They called it an attack because that was easier than admitting it was a suicide they'd orchestrated when they'd forgotten who kept their heart beating. In a desperate attempt to restore operations, the engineering team turned to the one document they'd ignored for 9 months, my 73-page risk assessment. I watched through my monitoring systems as they frantically printed copies, highlighted passages, and slowly began to understand the magnitude of their oversight. The irony was exquisite. Every warning I'd meticulously documented was now manifesting in real time. Page 12. Vendor authentication relies on daily heartbeat protocols. Page 34. System architecture includes cascading dependencies that require manual intervention if primary authentication fails. Page 56. The Pulse protocol represents a single point of failure that cannot be circumvented without complete infrastructure rebuild. Someone had scanned the memo and shared it in the main engineering channel. The comments poured in. She literally told us this would happen. Page 47 describes exactly what we're seeing. Why didn't anyone read this? Derek said it was too technical for board review. We're idiots. By 2 p.m., someone had found the reference to Appendix J buried in the infrastructure documentation. The missing appendix that would have explained how to disable or reset the Pulse protocol. The appendix I'd never written because job security isn't about being irreplaceable, it's about being necessary. Marcus Petrov made the connection first. Guys, the Pulse protocol, it's checking for biometric authentication, daily, from a specific user. From Natalie, Sarah Kim confirmed. The system is looking for Natalie. The channel went silent for 30 seconds, then erupted. Are you telling me our entire infrastructure depends on one person who approved this architecture? Check the Git history. It was approved by Derek 3 years ago. Of course it was. They tried everything, spoofing my biometric signature, but they didn't have my biometric data. Wisely kept off corporate servers, forcing a system rollback, but the protocol had anticipated that, marking all restore points as potentially compromised, even attempting to rebuild from scratch but without understanding the underlying dependencies. They were building on sand. At 3:30 p.m., Patterson Industries, our largest vendor, officially suspended their contract. $40 million in quarterly revenue, gone. The dominoes were falling faster now, each vendor losing faith as their connections failed, their shipments stalled, their invoices unpaid. Derek finally swallowed his pride at 4 p.m. The call came directly to my personal cell. Natalie.